Josh, the downside of having the world reserve currency be the USD from the perspective of the United States. Trifans Dilemma, and perhaps a potential solution to it. So for all of you who are not familiar with Trifans Dilemma, think of it like this. It's a cheat code that can be used by the United States as it currently stands, which just does the following. It's a cheat code that means demand for US dollars shoots up. And in doing so, what this also means is that as demand for the dollars shoot up, demand for exports fall off a cliff, which is the other side of the same coin right there for that. The problem from this arises is that when the world demands dollars, as the world does demand dollars, this goes back to the petrodollar system that came about in the 70s, the U.S. can sell dollars or can export dollars for not really doing anything to earn the dollars, such as manufacturing. And in return for sending these dollars abroad, which are demanded, we have to then, or we don't have to, but just generally is what happens, we import foreign goods. The foreign goods come in at a built-in discount due to the demand of the dollars we're sending out. Just a fancy way of saying our manufacturing base in the United States operates at a built-in disadvantage to this. And the disadvantage comes from the fact that our dollar exports makes the goods that we import inherently more attractive than we can make them ourselves from our own internal manufacturing.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. We're going to go over why other countries would want to do this as well. Let's take an example from George Gamon's most recent whiteboard video about this exact same topic. Let's use three countries: China, Russia, and the US. Let's say we're the US right now and everybody else needs dollars. So we go to China, we buy stuff from China because China produces a bunch of goods. They get the dollars that they need, which then they go to Russia and buy oil because commodities are sold in dollars, which is the main reason behind the dollar reserve currency. So China has the demand for dollars. They sell us stuff. They get dollars. They go to Russia, buy the oil. Russia, they sell the oil to everybody else. The reason why, it works great until it doesn't. And what we're seeing right now are these sanctions on Russian dollar reserves. The US flat out said, hey, you guys can't use your dollars anymore. What are other countries going to do when they see this? When Iran's, the Saudi Arabias, the Chinas, who are not woke and ESG friendly, who rely on these dirty stuff, what are they going to do? What are they going to think when they think, whoa, wait a minute, the US...
They'll think counterparty risk.
They're having this woke moment of just, hey, on a flash of a button, we're deciding Russia, nope, you're banned. Nope. So now there's this massive risk involved with the US as their counterparty, and no other country, or over the long run, if this continues to happen, there's a counterparty risk towards the US that these other countries do not want. They also don't want the world reserve currency because then their export base is going to go down and their poor and middle class is going to get poor, what we have seen today.
This is why it's very important for countries to have a mechanism in order to settle up between themselves. And so to settle up between these two people, they might just give, the account might just give a $100 bill to the mechanic, at which point, problem solved, people are now back in balance. But in doing so, that $100 bill in this situation is viewed neither the mechanic nor the accountant can issue their own $100 bill. And let's just say for all intents and purposes, they don't think, they know that $100 bill can then be redeemed for whatever they need to buy. Perhaps the mechanic needs to buy, groceries or whatever, right? It's fungible and expendable for other commodities down the line. Same thing applies in the relationship between countries. And so it's really, really, really important to get this balancing mechanism correct, because you don't have the balancing mechanism correct, you get these distortions. When you have the distortions, weird stuff starts to happen. Anyways, so the solution that Keynes suggested back at Bretton Woods in 43, 44 or whatever, right, was something called Bancor, bank gold. And the key thing is that when you have two countries that start getting out of whack, so let's say one country gets a little too heavy on their exports and one country gets a little too heavy on their imports, both of them have to issue or have to receive Bancor. And both countries will actually be penalized for that. So in other words, the country that actually has in order to close the trade deficit or whatever, right, the country that's exporting too much, they might have 100 units of Bancor on their country's balance sheet, of which they would be charged a fee for, something like a negative interest rate. Likewise, the country that was importing too much, they would then have a deficit of Bancor, which they would also be charged an interest penalty for. And the reason you want these two penalties to be charged is you want the countries to kind of realign and bring themselves back in the whole scheme of things. And so if I can take this and pull it into the modern scenario just for a second. So we use the example between two countries, and we use like two commodities, like, like wheat versus cobalt or whatever. But now, Josh, consider this. Imagine like the vast cornucopia of commodities out there: silver, gold, oil, wheat, whatever, uranium, just any possible commodity. You'll have various countries that will be specialized at producing, manufacturing, raw materials, finished products, whatever, right? And I would say that you also want these countries that are good at doing whatever they're good at doing to do it, right? But at the same time, you also have to have a way to counter it where you don't want these countries to export too much. So at the same time, these countries also need to do imports as well. And this is the way that if, sure, they're doing a bunch of exporting, and let's say Germans are exporting a bunch of Mercedes, but perhaps Germans are importing a bunch of, wheat or natural gas. There we go. They're importing a bunch of natural gas. So as the Germans export Mercedes, their economy heats up. But as they import natural gas or some other commodity, then all of a sudden, it's kind of like they're balancing out the scales. And it's true, Mercedes are going out, natural gas is coming in. But here's the important thing is that in the whole scheme of things across the entire world, you have this neutral balance. Imagine the cross currents, Josh, all these different cross currents coming in, and not just between Mercedes and natural gas, but anything. And that is why I think you need this, that is, I think, the ultimate solution to Trifans Dilemma, because the mechanism to solve the balance, if the mechanism solving the balance is also tied to the local unit of account, said in English, if dollars are used to settle the balance and dollars are also used locally in the United States, you have this distortion because you're asking a currency to try to do two things at once, and it can't do the two things at once, because trying to resolve the distortions will create trying to solve the distortions on the international level from the US perspective will create distortions on the domestic front. If you try to solve it domestically, you create distortions on the international front.
Yeah, and this is the reason why our poor and middle class just keep getting poor, because of this Trifans Dilemma. Like, let's think back to COVID when we needed masks. COVID started, masks were in every single human on the earth needed a mask, but the U.S. didn't produce any, so we were reliant on China to get these masks to come in. And without them, people, the scary Rona is going to get you. That is just an example of this. Our reliancy on another country. We could produce them, but because of our dollar being so strong, the entrepreneurs do not have the incentive to manufacture them in the US, as Justin was saying. So there are massive drawbacks to having the dollar as the world reserve currency.
Yeah, and I can identify two big drawbacks. So the first one we just spent a lot of time going over is, how to deal with the trade imbalances, okay? Now, let's say that Klaus and his ilk get their way and they create a supercomputer, and let's just say the AI, I don't think it can, but as a thought experiment, let's say the AI can actually balance out, the various trade imbalances. Okay, great. I don't think it can happen, but work with me. Well, that leads to the second problem. And this is something we saw in World War I, where, okay, if the US dollar is still the world's reserve currency in this regard, and if the US, gets into a moment or into a mood and decides to start sanctioning, people are freezing the assets of foreign central banks. Now, all of a sudden, you have the introduction of counterparty risk, because going back to my example of the $100 going from the accountant to the mechanic, no exterior party can freeze that $100, cash or whatever, right? But if you can, that's only a problem. How does it tie into World War I? Well, in the lead up to World War I, many people thought that because of all these, various economic treaties, countries, mainly Europe, but countries had with other countries, the security guarantees or whatever, right, that the cost of going to war would be prohibitive, so therefore nobody would go to war. And the answer to that question is, well, no. What really happened is that what people thought on the surface, this dependency, which created strength, actually created a great vulnerability, because countries thought, and there's a certain logic to this that, if you think about it, you probably will end up agreeing with, if you put yourself in the time, not with, our benefit of hindsight, but just thinking about it there, is that, okay, well, look, if we are completely dependent, or if we are so dependent upon our peers, and if our peers attack us, we're going to be hosed. We don't think our peers are going to attack us, but we can't necessarily close down the door to that possibility. And if our peers attack us, and if that attack would put us at such a vulnerability, the only way that we can respond is by attacking first, because they're going to be thinking the same problem. Well, they're going to attack us. So you get this self-fulfilling prophecy where the dependency doesn't actually create stability. It creates destability. It does the exact opposite. So this is, again, hopping on to one of the things that Keynes would argue, and that I think you're going to see happen, is that whatever we use as the settlement, as the world's reserve currency, it's got to be beyond governments. That is, it cannot be frozen. I mean, sure, I guess you can track it or whatever. In fact, you probably want to be able to track it. But country A can't freeze whatever the reserve asset is of country B like we can right now. So anyways, big picture to say this, the solution, I think, to Trifans Dilemma is to having something. And I would note, too, that with crypto, there's almost a custom built, like the crypto ecosystem, pick whichever one you want, of course, in it. But that, I would say, I can't think of, it's like a glove over a hand. Like I can't think of a better solution in order to balance, the thousands, hundreds of millions of, like transactions per day between country A and country B, all the way through country Z or whatever, right? To balance all this stuff out and keep everything in line. This seems like the ideal thing. So you're able to take into account all the pricing data from all these various transactions, and you're able to do so in a truly reserve asset that can't be sanctioned, that can't be frozen, or that can't be muddled with by another country. And right now, the dollar's reserve currency, this fails both these tests. And that is why I make the argument that the United States has gotten to the point where it is now more advantageous, mainly to bring back manufacturing and to let our currency devalue the rest of the world. It is more advantageous to not have the dollar be the world reserve currency than it is.
This is where I think Justin would pitch the idea of XRP potentially filling in the role, but that is a topic for a different video. Thank you, and we will see you in the next one.